Hi, I'm Steve Hallfish, ACE, host of the Art of the Cut podcast. It's rare to get a look at the creative process of a top feature film editor sitting in front of an actual working timeline of a Best Picture Oscar-nominated film. Today, thanks to the generous spirit and hospitality of Oscar-winning editor Joe Walker, ACE, that rare chance is here. With Dune Part 3 keenly anticipated for a winter release and Dune Part 2 far enough along to reflect on, this is a craft-first conversation outside the awards cycle. You'll be able to identify some strategies to bring tension and suspense to your storytelling, tips on how to make a punch really connect, the hidden influence of the Roadrunner on Dune Part 2, how important sound effects are to building the musicality of a cut, integrating image, music, and dialogue as we explore the seduction of fade, how the Kuleshov effect is still a great way to put the audience inside of a character's head, a special Easter egg you might not have seen the first time you watched Dune 2, and seeing generations of faith collapse in 1 second and 22 frames, the power of the perfect reaction shot. So let's get to it. I'm in my editing studio in Chicago, chatting with Joe over Zoom in his editing studio. Joe, I've had the pleasure of visiting you at your home, and it looks like that's where you are now. Before we dive in, how did you end up cutting from home?
Well, it all came about during the pandemic when I turned my home into a post-production facility with a bed in the top floor. And I normally have this room, which is where Denis Villeneuve will normally sit. He's very abstemious, normally just sits there with one strong coffee at the beginning of the day. I've got an avid media composer. I listen in stereo. That seems to work for me. I did experiment with other formats, but there was always something distracting about them. If it works in stereo, it's going to work. I've got a high quality monitor. I've got 2 monitors in front of me. I have a little monitor here, which is trained on my front yard, so I can tell when deliveries are coming. And this technology never fails to alert me whenever a coyote takes a nighttime crap in my backyard. My assistant Chris and his dog Jake are often in the room across, which is shouting distance. And there can be up to 4 cutting rooms functioning in this building, particularly in that period known as the director's cut, which is normally a 10-week period.
I see you got the Stream Deck working. I pitched you on buying that a while ago as a way to audition groups of audio easier at the touch of a button.
Yeah, I use that as a really quick way to select blocks of audio in one go. And I can even, if I'm trying to dig out a sound effect from an outside library, an online library, then I press a button and it opens the web on the page that I want. For example, I could set a button to open the script on my desktop. I could probably use it for a lot more than I do.
I want to talk about the eclipse scene. But before we get into that, can you explain how you organize your timeline?
Of course. So the timeline I'm showing you here is dated, oh my God, I can't read it, 10/17/23. So that's at a very late stage of the process, late enough for there to be a check print, which is really where we're looking at a sort of mid-stage DI underneath that masking layer at the top. This is really there to be able to just double check that everything is a proper match to my cut. In my timeline, I've got various final VFX shots, and down on the lower video levels, I've got the dailies. Below on the timeline, I've got my audio. First up, the sync tracks. At the moment, these are all muted, but these are the tracks that I would have edited a day or 2 after this sequence was shot. So probably that first pass would have been the dialogue tracks on about 6 tracks and some sound effects laid across, 8 stereo pairs of sound effects. I try to avoid using music until absolutely necessary. I just try and encourage the dialogue to its best quality and to use, to give space for sound effects and even start developing sound effects of our own for the cut, but also with our sound designers who were working quite early. So looking down the timeline here, below the dialogue tracks, I've got the dialogue stems. Because it's late stage, this would have been the crash mix from the dub stage, a fold down to a stereo pair. And if you're playing that,
how about her?
You'll hear
she's fine.
Beautifully cleaned up dialogue. And then I've got a track here for crowd effects. Below that, muted, I've got my SFX, in other words, sound effects, things that me and Chris Voutsanas, my first assistant, would have worked on to help kind of sell the cut without music, and we do a huge amount on that. Not least because at some point you have to show a cut to the studio or a test audience, and there may not have been time to get polished sound effects. Even if it isn't actually used in the final mix of the film, it helps me find the rhythm of a scene and to be able to kind of increase the musicality of a cut, if you like, so that, especially in a scene like this, which has got a pulse from the thumper. All those temporary sound effects we sketched in are muted here because by this stage, months after the sequence was first cut, we have way more advanced sound mixes from the dubbing theatre to lay into the timeline. So here we've got sound effect stems, Foley stems. So for example, on the Foley stems, you'll find all this kind of, all the work of our Foley artists. Gun handling, sand, and of course footsteps, which are all beautiful. I really celebrate the contribution of Foley to these films. We're always trying to create a kind of documentary approach to Arrakis in a way. What Theo Green used to call FDR, fake documentary realism. Backgrounds are going to be things like wind. It's very subtle, you can barely hear it. And then below that, I've got music tracks. These would have been cues that were coming out of Hans Zimmer's studio. I work with Clint Bennett, an amazing music editor here in LA. We're playing ping pong with the music. He'll send me a track. I'll adjust it against the cut. At this point, it's quite late stage, so you're not seeing the entire mess of music tracks you'd normally see, where I'm often working in stems, and Hans is very generous, honestly, because he gives us all of the food groups of his music, of which there are many, many layers. And that gives us the ability to be very flexible, re-editing his music. And sometimes it gives you a little gem. The singer, Loire, whose voice is such a kind of iconic feature of Dune, was something we first encountered listening through to the stems at some point. We loved that immediately and realised, oh, we've sort of got our Bond theme. So there we go, that's the timeline.
Let's talk about some of the creative decisions, why you chose to do things, where you started the scene, and what some of the challenges were in cutting.
Mm-hmm. You know, we're meant to be picking up Paul almost straight after the end of part one. So, you know, the big story beat for me that helps you set up a kind of long transformation of Paul across many, many scenes is that at this point he's really at his most vulnerable. Dune Part 2, and one could argue science fiction itself, is all about tiny, fragile human drama set against a colossal, hostile landscape. And the contrast couldn't be starker than here, where we're moving from the vastness of the planet to a tiny shrimp-sized fetus in Jessica's womb. Then we start, the first shot in the sequence is but for one eclipse shot, it's a oneer. And for those that don't know what a oneer is, this is quite an elaborate piece of choreography that takes you through all these different compositions without the camera cutting. A few moments later, I really love this little piece of misdirection. After you cut to Paul's point of view, for a moment you kind of believe this next shot is going to be the reverse. In other words, the Harkonnens' point of view of Paul and Jessica. But actually, the Harkonnens are one step behind. Denis is, of course, a master of creating shots like this that explore shifting points of view. Also, I have to say that these were shot in two completely different countries.
Oh my goodness.
This is Jordan, but this is UAE, some 1,500 miles away. According to Denis, you get better sand in UAE and better rocks in Jordan. The original shot of this, it's completely mute. This would have been, I think, a second unit shot, and they didn't carry a sound recordist with them. So the sound had to be added later, and his voice and the kind of quality of the voice was all stuff nurtured in post. You're trying to kind of tell the story with the sound of this, that these people are walking around with goldfish bowls on their heads, that they are deeply uncomfortable in this environment. They're the whitest skinned, hairless people that have no protection from the sun whatsoever. So they're on, sun factor 8,000. So it was kind of a cool thing to start thinking about their sort of disadvantage, which plays to the long game of Paul. To conquer Arrakis, as his father says, he has to harness desert power.
Not only are you trying to cut this action scene, but you're also trying to create a character arc that goes throughout the whole film. So you're also thinking, how can I get him to a place at the beginning so that he has someplace to go?
Yes, that's what you glean from the script. And as an editor, you need to keep the trajectory true to magnetic north, if you like, to chart Paul's rise from this vulnerable position all the way to being a potential leader before we flip the switch and see the rise of his shadow, Feyd-Rautha, from psychopathic playboy to what the Bene Gesserit see as a prospect. So yes, here it's a very young man, very, very far away from home, with nobody to protect him apart from a woman capable of, bashing somebody's head in with a stone. This was also very carefully calibrated not to be too fast. We're not rushing these moments. I think they're creepy. The soundtrack is quite spare, and it means that the kind of deliciousness of that sword being pulled, there's really very little going on. The timeline here is empty and the music is really minimal. Hans does this very beautiful job sometimes of these atmospheric types of music, and he often uses a thing in Dune, which is this based on the idea of shepherd tone. It's been likened to a barber's pole, in that there's an illusion of a rising or descending tone, but it never actually moves, because as the highest frequencies are fading out, the lowest frequencies are equally fading in. Wherever you start the shepherd tone, you can carry on for however long you like, and it will continuously rise in tension. I can go back to my first cut, and that's where you start to hear our temp sound being built up from scratch. You can probably see in the timeline, I've gone to great lengths to try and build up the sound. These shots are mute, so I just like to feel the kind of rhythm of shots to know how long I can hold them.
Now, I remember this shot where they leap off that sand dune and go to the rocks. The screening I was in, the crowd went nuts.
It is a moment in the film, isn't it, where it just, this sequence is inspired. That smash there becomes a little climax. And it marks the beginning of a new tension build. You can start to hear the worms moaning. This beautiful aerial footage is shot by Dylan Goss, who does all of the helicopter work for Denis. Here we're in a kind of ambiguous place again. We're floating over the desert, so it's not a strict point of view, more a kind of inhabited point of view, something that most of all conveys a feeling. There was an intention there to kind of get the dialogue and the bullet very close together to make that as surprising as it could be. And my VFX editor, Eddie Garcia, did me a beautiful little temp for this bullet hit.
So obviously there's no bullet wound. That's not in the dailies.
No, this is what we have in the original dailies. Just a kind of subtle head movement. I mean, it's already planned that it isn't a big reaction there. And you can see that I've identified the frame where it should hit. And of course, there's a sound effect that I'd laid in there to kind of indicate exactly the frame. And also, you hold on to it for a little bit after it's hit him. So it, it's trying to get across in the edit the concept of being nonplussed. I mean, I've only seen real violence myself once in real life. And I saw a bar fight and somebody picked up a chair and smashed somebody's bare head with a chair. The thing that really struck me, age 18, it's horrific to see violence like that, but the thing that really stuck in my mind is that the guy didn't collapse to the floor. He wasn't knocked out with a kind of hammer blow. There was this long period of time where everything in his body was sending him red alerts, but he was desperately trying to kind of pretend everything is normal. And that little horrifying moment where somebody has been, in this case, shot in the head, there's a moment where, if not for him, who's rapidly losing consciousness, then for all the other people around him standing there, I wanted to kind of really dig into that beat, that little, just to leave it longer than you normally would. It doesn't go instantly into gunfight. There's a moment of uncertainty while people are kind of wondering what's happened. They didn't see the bullet. They know something's happened, but they don't know what it is. And capturing that kind of moment of dreamlike moment that is sadly true of real violence was something that I really informed the cut at this point. There's something to say there. I mean, first of all, there's a lovely, crafty little cut in the middle of that, which is between this shot and that. If you go to the original shot, he lands on a mat. And this one is a more complete fall. It's a different shot altogether, and I wanted to use both shots, and I kind of knitted them together. There's also, I had a little discovery, and perhaps the best way to kind of demonstrate it, like many, many years ago, I was cutting on film, and I was cutting a horrible sequence where a blind man was being beaten up in his flat. And I had a shot of the blind man with his wall eyes receiving this horrible punch to the face from a person he couldn't see, and a punch that came from nowhere, if you like. And just completely by accident, as often happened on film, I was cutting this sequence and I chopped 4 frames or 3 frames out from the punch. I'd used it in a different place and I'd forgotten to stick it back together again. And the force of the punch just kind of happened, the cut just happened as the head went back. And I kind of learned something, which is that if you take a few frames out at the point of if the shot is right, you can make it really go wallop. There's a very good example in the sort of scene that followed this, which is this Harkonnen guy who gets it in the neck. I'll show you that shot.
I suggest you get some rest.
I'll show you that again.
I suggest you get some rest.
There's no time for him to react, whereas, actually the original shot is...
I suggest you get some rest.
You can see, if you look at it, even if it's a very, very good reaction. But in my jump cut version, the laws of physics tells you that the force of that hit was very hard. I've actually, on that cut point there, I've taken out several frames. In fact, 3. And the same here. When I've got this guy being shot, there's a similar acceleration. We obviously have a bit of a kink for body falls. I've always loved body falls, and there's particularly the noise of body falls. And maybe it was because, I came up from being a sound editor at the BBC, where we didn't kind of make this kind of film, that's for sure. And whenever there was a chance to put in a body fall, which I used to take from a Hollywood library called Hollywood Edge, and there's a couple of very well-worn punches and body falls in that. And whenever I got to put those in, I used to think to myself, movies, I'm working on movies. So I've always kind of, those extreme Foleys have always rather appealed to me. And I've got to say, I think we've contributed one of the best body falls in Blade Runner 2049, Sapper Morton falling to his death. Back to this, we're in a kind of Roadrunner territory here. And Denny used to say to me, you know, we on the wall there, we used to have a picture of Roadrunner to remind us to kind of lean that way, to go towards the magnificent craziness of Chuck Jones. And I think this moment is honestly a little bit of a homage.
I was also trying to figure out that edit where he looks up and he sees the body fall. That is, somebody might not even recognize there's an edit in there.
Exactly. It's a really quick shot in there. This little shot here is what is that? It's 8 frames long. I mean, we've just come out of a Wanna, you know, just a few minutes ago that was, you know, just over a minute, and now we're talking about 8 frames to make the point. You hold back, you create tension, and then you deliver a series of fast, rhythmic punches. That's the attitude.
You once described that to me when we had our original interview about 12 Years a Slave. You called it landscaping.
Yeah, I mean, you can indulge yourself to your heart's content, make everything long and not cut, but you have to kind of create tension. And, you know, I'm finding that by kind of being rhythmic and trying to find a rhythm of things so that there are surprises. Mm-hmm. You know, you create a certain tension by not cutting. And particularly if you do it for 17 minutes, then actually something else goes on there. When you've got a 17-minute long shot like we had in Steve McQueen's film Hunger, your audience sort of invests and follows it. And when they realize that the kind of filmmaker and the editor aren't going to hold their hand and, you know, satisfy their desire for a change, then there's a sort of moment of attachment, then detachment, then attachment again, which is deeper, that's something else. That's an exaggerated form of it, which is a bit more like being in a gallery and looking at a painting on the wall. I suppose one of the things I'm talking about is withholding, depriving the audience of what they want and then rewarding them. And that informs all editing, even in a more typical two-hander conversation. Rather than just try and work your way through the dialogue of a scene and say, well, he's saying this line, so I must be on him. She's saying this line, so I must be on her. There's a beautiful dance that you can do as an editor, which is withholding that sometimes. I mean, what plays better is a reaction and what plays better is a statement. There's a certain power to seeing somebody say something in vision in close-up. It's a huge power, but that's the ace. And if you play aces all the time, then, well, you run out of aces. I'm going to skip forward a little bit to this moment where Paul is tracking the Harkonnen, but he has no weapon apart from a small rock. There's kind of lots of great little contrasts in that. I love going from this intimately close to this wide shot, you know, such impact. And don't forget, we're trying to get a rating that's appropriate for a large audience. And so there's a limit on how many times you can show things. You can't necessarily show somebody being stabbed. you can probably get away with the sword being pulled out. And that kind of informs slightly the way that we cut that sword fight.
Can you show us the section where he runs from his cover and pulls the sword from the fallen body? That's the start of the sword fight, that little burst of editing. I'm struck by the, when you choose to be out on a wide shot and when you choose to be in on the close kinetic action of the fighting.
Well, if everything is in medium close-up, your eye tires, and you also neglect as an editor to kind of... this is a film about, intense human stories on a vast landscape. Frank Herbert came at this story from having investigated the movement of dunes. So his way into the story was from the ecological point of view. So it's kind of in the DNA of the story, which is it's a little frail boy up against the most hostile landscape you can imagine. And it felt like it gave us a chance to kind of remind people of this extraordinary landscape and great shots done by Greg Fraser.
Beautiful cinematography.
Yeah, really.
Great direction.
It's just glorious. And, this is designed really for a cinematic experience where those wide shots play. And you can use them. You don't have to play them at length. There's sometimes just a quick refresher like this one is just very quick. There. And also, even momentarily, it makes you wonder where Jessica is and what she's doing, or it exaggerates how much in the open they are, how vulnerable they are. I'm extraordinarily lucky with these actors, right? The looks that I'm working with from Rebecca and Timothée, the look on his face when his mother is dispatching a man like a beetle. That was a thing that really happened, was the stone rolled down the dune. Rather a surreal moment. And of course, anything that the location sound gives you, and there was a fantastic team on this, we would use. This was the sound that I got.
And cut!
You never stand with your back towards the open.
You could probably tell that I'm just sort of equally excited by audio as I am with visuals, and it's trying to find a kind of perfect balance and a perfect rhythm, and trying to, a rhythm, whatever it may be, whether it's the sound of a stone rolling down that dictates how long I can hold a shot. Is there some audio intrigue that keeps the rhythm going? And of course, there's the rhythm of the actors themselves, and they have their own, beautiful, complicated music in their faces and their bodies. So it's dancing with that and engaging with it that helps cut a scene like this.
Let's shift to the fade scene with the fireworks. I want to talk about the intent of the scene and how intent or purpose influences your editing. When you're cutting, do you think, what's the purpose of the scene in the movie and how do I deliver on that intent?
Always. That's always the point. How does the scene play into the larger scheme of things? And this scene's interesting for that because in the original assembly, like in the script, Fade and Paul's journey, it was designed to go between the two stories a little bit more than it did in the end. We decided at some point in the director's cut period that it was better to kind of let these long rises take place. We've talked about Paul's rise from a murmur to a battle cry. That's quite a climb. And Fade is kind of the mirror version of that. Both groomed by ambitious mentors. Both products of bloodlines cultivated by the Bene Gesserit. Even contained in this scene is a little bit of subtext that, like Paul, Fade bears one of the telltale signs of their breeding programs, a predisposition to foresight.
I remember now. I dreamed about you last night.
A pleasant dream, I hope.
And why that's important is ultimately the climax of this film is a face-off between Fade and Paul, and you have to believe that Fade is a formidable opponent, probably with the leading edge, because he has the backing of the Bene Gesserit, and he has no hesitation or remorse killing people. We see him dispatch other Harkonnens without, just as an acrobatic act. This step in Fade's path is the Bene Gesserit testing him. They work in the shadows, using sensory weapons, drilling for weakness. So as an editor, you're leaning into the darkness of that. With Fade, though, the darkness is strangely fun. The big gift in the script was that there were these celebratory fireworks. It's a gift in audio terms, and a gift for Greg Fraser, the cinematographer.
We've met, haven't we?
I don't think so. I'm Lady Margot Fenring. I'm here to honor your coming of age.
You're not allowed in this section. How did you get past the guards?
The gods? May I ask, what are you doing here? You're not taking part in your own celebrations.
There's a couple of things going on there, right? I mean, first of all, is just the delightful bite of these performances.
How did you get past the guards?
The gods?
I just absolutely love that little moment of caprice. In terms of the cutting copy sound, it's built around a change in the camera. You can see that these shots of Fenring have no front fogging. But Greg had an incredible light setup on this one with a whole ring of lamps, and at a certain point they start flooding the lens, and we take a cue from that to say, okay, he's hypnotized. As a kind of template, a proof of concept, if you like, in the cutting copy we use sound effects almost like a score here. We dug out a temp track of fireworks which has these incredible thunderous. Let's have a look at the waveform and you'll be able to kind of see there are these fantastic, almost like cannon blasts. There's at one point there's a little dog that's barking and that we had to keep editing out. Can you hear that dog? As we go into those shots where we got front fogging on the camera and we're saying we're no longer in the real Harkonnen world, we're in a sort of mental space, the sound becomes super reverberative, like a dream. At this point, you're just hearing it almost like distant thunder, with all of the EQ suppressed from the top. And in fact, you can probably see here, even in the original first cut, I've done a lot of EQ on the tracks to try and make that happen.
So all of the stuff that you're trying to do here is showing that we're much more in an internal world. This is much more stuff that's going on in their heads that you need some way of indicating that in your edit.
Mm-hmm. The idea was to go slightly counterintuitive, that the voice is clean, and when you're in Dolby Atmos, you're inside the voice. You know, Lair's voice is pushed into the middle of the room, and I think even the overheads on Atmos. And that gives you a sense in the audience that you're inside. It's inside your mind almost. You're inside Fade's mind, hearing this hypnotic voice. And then I made a very deliberate choice. If you look very carefully at this shot, and it's even more clear when you look in IMAX.
I dreamed about you last night.
A pleasant dream, I hope.
Don't mock me, woman.
I wouldn't dare.
We made the choice to put voice very clearly when her mouth is visibly closed.
I wouldn't dare.
I know you've been at your tricks.
You're starting to get a little music here now.
Tell me. Something wrong?
Denis' clever plan is you cut to a big wide to exaggerate the fact that he's in a completely different space now. It was only a few footsteps away in his perception of things.
Something wrong?
I don't recognize this place.
This little bit of the sequence is a section where I'm super happy with the way it turned out. And this is where the great thing about being able to kind of collaborate, be the kind of meeting point. You know, the editing room is sort of the still point of the turning world of sound, camera, performance, and VFX and music. And this is a bit of a way of combining them all in a beautiful dance. There was something of a tarantelle, the sense of Fade being caught in a spider's nest almost. Beautiful version of the Harkonnen theme, this little step-like dance piece. It's always syncopated, offbeat, and that's a perfect match for kind of Fade in some way being on the back foot, as it were. But also there were little moments where I could shift the dialogue around to kind of fit with the music. So you can see from these little dialogue tracks here, I'm spacing them around the music. Let's just look at that moment. The other thing that I absolutely love is being able to play with moments out of focus. Greg gave us lots of beautiful shots like this where it starts with the focus blown. Not something that studio bosses normally allow in a film, but... That's a kind of deliberate choice in the cut, which was, of course, if I wanted, he could walk forward.
So there's the little moment where Fade comes forward towards her. It's very reminiscent of the first movie. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, one of the really nice things about, Dune Part 1 had such a characterful way of doing things like the voice and the visions. Paul's visions were very much an ingredient in Dune Part 1, and I think they were done extremely well. But one of the choices was maybe this time we lent more into the kind of action-adventure side of things. Having set the world up and shown how it works, more or less, we were freer to kind of lean into some sort of huge war scenes, see it as like more of a war movie. And things like the voice and the visions, we could really underplay because we felt like the audience didn't need to be persuaded. And here's a good example where he's leapt all the way across the room, but it's subtle. I didn't have to have a kind of moment where he blacks out and moves forward through space, which was done so well in Part 1.
You dismissed my mother in her own house.
Come here, kneel.
Another choice I'm really fond of is not to show Fenring's line on her face,
Put your right hand in the box.
but to play it over Fade, because it just felt, he's upended by that. And I wanted to let the actor make that point, not the edit.
Put your right hand in the box.
Other ingredients that didn't need to be quite as elaborate the second time round in the edit were these visions. And there's a really good example of that. You're trying to sum up in this scene that's after Paul has taken the water of life, and he has this moment with Jessica where they're alone in this temple. How is Paul different from having taken the water of life? Let's go inside his head and experience what he now sees, which is the concept of seeing many futures laid out in front of him, and for him to be able to kind of predict a favourable outcome by looking at one narrow path, and he expresses that in these rather beautiful shots here.
Our enemies are all around us, and in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
That little moment there, that's a tiny little prediction of the outcome of this battle with Paul and Fade. And it, of course, is the knife in Fade's guts, which is the sting in the tail at the end of their fight. It's a notion that people may well forget is in the initial training scene with Gurney in part 1.
I have you.
Aye. But look down, my lord. You'd have joined me in death. I see you found the mood.
So those little, what is that? It's 30 frames long. You may not even clock it when you see it the first time. And look, it's emphasized by a fantastic piece of sound from Hans. It's kind of halfway between singing and an instrument. And then in the edit, cemented by a close-up of Paul. That's a trick that mesmerized the Russians in the 1920s, the Kuleshov effect. If you show something and follow it with a close-up of, well, in this case, Paul, deep in thought, it suggests that that is what he's thinking about. It's the subtlest possible way. It's 30 frames, acknowledgement of what he now sees and how he now behaves, having changed dramatically from taking in a poison. So this is the Paul Fade fight. This was originally shot over a period of days. It's a big scene because the entire cast, more or less, is in this room.
I'm happy to finally meet you.
The key players, of course, are Paul and Fade, but in all shots with a crowd around them. The boast is that basically it didn't change from the very first time I cut it. There's maybe some tiny little changes in there. But I spent a lot of time in Hungary. It was very much towards the end of the shoot in Hungary before the main unit left to go to the desert. And it was, I really lavished time on trying to get the fight absolutely right. There was a lot of material. I remember my assistants had to kind of build me a string out, and that string out was actually so big that I couldn't load it. Here's that string out. There were 14 hours of material in this timeline which had to be condensed into this scene. So there's a lot of angles. One of the beauties of it was being able to show a director towards the end of the shoot what is very nearly the end of the film, and to be able to, I was really, really proud to show it to him and say, we've got a really strong ending. And knowing where you're all going to on a 110-day shoot, and knowing that the end of your film is strong like this, is kind of a great thing an editor can do to kind of encourage the director and his team, and to hopefully inspire confidence in this journey, which is long. And so, Denny occasionally pays me a huge compliment of saying, it works, don't change a thing.
I do love the idea that I've talked about with so many other editors, the gift of having a director who knows that you've got it and that they've been supported and that their vision has been realized.
That's true. And, it's not just my department that works like that. I think VFX department often works like that. They will very early on often offer you a really brilliant shot, seen all the way soup to nuts to the end. I think on Dune Part 1, it was an ornithopter landing. By showing everyone a shot that's completely done early, it's a great way of saying that's the mark that we've got to hit with all of these shots. And also with Hans, I think the first piece of music that he fully scored and fully produced on Dune Part 1 was the end piece, which is an ecstatic piece of, it's the Paul Atreides theme, large, as they go off into the sunset at the end of Part 1.
Desert power.
This is only the beginning.
That's where we've got to get to. There's a lot of material of people looking.
Yeah, lots of reaction shots, which are really important.
A particular moment where they really come into play is where it looks as though Paul is done for. That particular moment, you have to kind of pick what order you're going to go in. You've got reaction shots from Gurney, from Jessica, and you've got one from Stilgar. And of course, they could have gone in any order, and it felt the most natural to go this way. They were all good reactions, but this reaction of Stilgar's, it just feels like you see generations of faith evaporating in 1 second and 22 frames. It's kind of an extraordinary close-up. And of course, many of them here are very, very swift. You know, Jessica Rises, it's a tiny little shot there. I mean, it's nothing. It's 13 frames.
I love that silhouette shot there in the middle.
Oh, yeah. You know, look, I had all this wonderful material, and particularly interesting was that shot because, of course, there's kind of crucifix imagery in this scene and in the previous scene. And, you know, the intense stuff becomes even more intense when you cut away to a wide shot, right? The variety means that the viciousness of the close-ups have a kind of percussion quality that they might not have without. Let's get stuck into the weeds on the fight itself. Of course, the build-up to it, you know, you're going slow, 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 fast.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
I've talked about the value of withholding things. So I've got to say, there was a bit of manipulation there in terms of sound again to kind of create some tension, which is that the knife fight doesn't have music. You know, maybe it would be a typical thing in a Hollywood film to get the drums in at this point and kind of, you know, goose it up that way with a bit of Hollywood drumming. But this is awkwardly silent. All eyes are on it, and the crowd isn't oohing and ahhing at any moment until Paul is at this clear disadvantage. That's where we save the voice of the crowd until that point. It felt very important to make it brutal, real, visceral, and dynamic to watch. The other big thing was because they shot it so well, I had a lot of variety. And in this first part of the sword fight, I wanted to kind of show the kind of, you know, that feeling of almost an audience's point of view of multiple angles on the thing. And of course, they're just, some of them are very rich. There's a high angle there. There's silhouette shots there. Also, I've tried to keep a variety of rhythm and of shot lengths. It isn't just fast cut all the way through. There was this one particular shot that I thought was, you know, I felt like Paul, that I was just being pushed back by fade, and you could feel by holding on this shot the full force of Fade Routher that he's coming towards you. It's this shot in particular. I wanted to kind of play this one at length. Because it just keeps coming, you know? It's quite free in terms of editing. You know, there's a little kind of jump in there. I never felt inhibited by having matching shots. I just went with the kind of rhythm of things. I like that. 3 shots effectively. You know, in Britain we used to call this an American cut, but it's basically cutting down the line. Instead of cutting between matching shots, we just slam in. Wide, closer, close.
She's your pet?
It's got to be said that it doesn't matter how impressive the fighting or the battle or the VFX, if you don't care about the characters, it just means absolutely nothing. And Dune, the cutting of Dune, the writing of Dune, every aspect of Dune is about making the characters really upfront and forceful, so that, you know, that tiny little shot of Irulan there is the moment where she realised Paul has a love in his life.
She's your pet?
And now she knows that's the right time to have that shot of Irulan. Also, look, I've got to pay some tribute to the actors who give so much in those looks in just such a short fragment of time, and are so on the money, so that an editor like me can come along and just be like a pig amongst the acorns, honestly, of this footage. And really, it's just my job to try and find out the perfect place for it.
Any special attention for the pet?
Still noticing no music. This is all just breaths and footsteps and Fade's kind of raspy voice. Then we get to the last moments of this fight. The editing plan is to try and make it look as much as possible that we're going to watch Paul die, and not to give away that it's Fade who's got the dagger in his guts. And to all intents and purposes, you've seen enough and on this face to think that Paul is going to die. And then you reveal it. And it's only at that point that you bring back the music.
You fought well, Atreides.
Joe, what a great walkthrough of your timeline and the decisions that you've made, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about how this was crafted.
It's a great pleasure. It's the first time we've done this as well, eh, Steve? I mean, this is like, we've been talking together for longer than I care to remember.
More than a decade.
It's nice to try something new and to let you into a more intimate look at what it's like in front of me day by day.